Hey, this is Tamara Quinny, and I am presenting a PowerPoint on the psychology of elite athletes. There's a lot of things to consider and think about when talking about the psychology of elite athletes. Elite athletes spend a significant amount of time and energy physically training in order to hone and refine their bodies, skills, and talents to that of an exceptional level for repetitive peak performance. Elite athletes' psychologies are often overlooked or undervalued despite the many cognitive skills and abilities that they have to refine that are linked to their performance. From off-season training all the way to training camp, the regular season and postseason, the amount of time elite athletes dedicate to perfecting their craft not only takes a toll on them physically, but psychologically as well. Continuous training and competition can have both positive and negative physical and psychological effects on an athlete depending on whether or not they're achieving and accomplishing their own personal and or team goals as they advance in their respective sport careers. Everything from the accomplishing of accolades and achievements to the suffering of severe or repetitive injuries, illnesses, mental disorders, sleep deprivation, life events, nutrition restrictions, trades, getting waived, picked up or by a team, social support, sport career dissatisfaction, and many more factors can ultimately influence an athlete's physical, social, and psychological well-being. Being perceived as weak is the biggest stigma within sports culture. When talking about the psychology of elite athletes, you need to first know what well-being is. Well-being is predominantly studied from two perspectives: the hedonic tradition of subjective well-being and the eudaimonic tradition of psychological well-being and social well-being. Subjective well-being refers to life satisfaction and happiness. Psychological well-being includes six dimensions that are viewed as being vital to a person's self-actualization: the person's self-acceptance, positive relations to others, autonomy, environmental mastery, purpose in life, and personal growth. Social well-being consists of a person's perception of social acceptance, social actualization, social contribution, social coherence, and social integration. Here is a chart visually articulating global well-being and sports-related well-being. Mental toughness is a key component in sports culture. It is having a natural or developed psychological edge that enables you to generally cope better than your opponents with the many demands, such as competition, training, lifestyle, that sport places on the performer, specifically to be more consistent and better than your opponents in remaining determined, focused, confident, and in control under pressure. Researchers have embraced the approach and the notion that mentally tough athletes have constellation of specific psychological attributes. The 4C model is a model that describes the four key components of mental toughness consisting of psychological attributes such as confidence, challenge, commitment, and control. Studies identify characteristics unique to their specific sport, supporting the idea that mental toughness can be expressed in many different ways across different sports. Numerous studies have been conducted regarding various issues surrounding mental toughness. These have included the development of mental toughness across time, theoretical explanation for mental toughness, the notion of mental toughness as a mindset more susceptible to change or more like a personality trait which is more genetically inherited, different types of mental toughness, and building mental toughness. Mental toughness is believed to be developed from multiple sources: parents, teammates, coaches, players, and even in the environment. Mental ill health is starting to be brought attention to. It is accepted that those competing in sports at the highest level may be vulnerable to physical injury resulting from pushing their bodies to extremes of endurance and risk. However, the strain put on psychological welfare of such athletes is less acknowledged and managed. Both the status of being an elite athlete and the journey to gaining that identity can be risk factors. To become an elite athlete demands personal attributes such as perfectionism and extreme focus and commitment. It also involves high-level unique life stressors, including pressures to perform consistently and possibility of overinvestment in the single identity of athlete. Research suggests that holding multiple positive identities is a common protective factor against mental ill health. The fewer identities the person possesses and the greater investment in these identities, the greater the threat to mental health should one of those identities be compromised. For the elite athlete whose lifestyle may limit the range of support mechanisms or whose identity as a top athlete is compromised by either injury or lack of performance, this can lead to psychological vulnerability. 3 particular points across an athlete's career are recognized as times of vulnerability: leaving the sport due to injury or lack of performance, retirement, and struggling on in silence. It's also recognized that stigma and fear of the impact on careers are attached to non-disclosure of mental ill health, silencing those who are struggling. Research into mental health of elite athletes is challenging to the stigma and other barriers surrounding it, which leads to athletes and coaches' unwillingness to speak out. However, emerging research specific to elite athletes shows that despite having protective factors such as good health, employment, support network, and the benefits of exercise, elite athletes are just as likely as the general population to develop mental ill health, and for some groups there may be an elevated risk of it. Continuing on pertaining to mental health of athletes, the intense mental and physical demands placed on elite athletes are a unique aspect of a sporting career, and these may increase their susceptibility to certain mental health problems and risk-taking behaviors. Furthermore, the peak competitive years for elite athletes tend to overlap with the peak age for the risk of onset of mental disorders. In addition to physical and competition stress, elite athletes face a unique array of workplace stressors, including the pressures of increased public scrutiny through mainstream and social media, limited support networks due to relocation, group dynamics in team sports, and the potential for injuries to end careers prematurely. The ways by which athletes appraise and cope with these stressors can be a powerful determinant of the impact the stressors have on both their mental health and their sporting success. Athletes tend not to seek support for mental health problems for reasons such as stigma, lack of understanding about mental health and its potential influence on performance, and the perception of help seeking as a sign of weakness. While it is well established that physical activity has a positive effect on mental health, a review has found that intense physical activity performed at the elite athletes level might instead compromise mental well-being, increasing symptoms of anxiety and depression through overtraining, injury, and burnout. Developing a comprehensive understanding of the mental health and psychological well-being specific to elite athletes has the potential to advance models of care and management of this population, which may in turn facilitate performance gains. Such an understanding is required to provide guidance for sports practitioners, including coaches, medical staff, and sports psychologists, in developing the coping abilities of elite athletes and in turn improving their emotional well-being. There's been talk about whether or not mental toughness and mental health are contradictory. The culture in sport is one where there is stigma associated with athlete mental health issues, and therefore any desire to obtain professional help is undermined by the fear of being labeled mentally weak. Cultures, sport type, and gender are important determinants of athletes' attitude toward psychological consultation and counseling, particularly with regard to fears of being stigmatized by others as weak, deficient, or psychologically unfit. Players who internalize perceived mentally tough dimensions of the social cultural context are often held in high regard when compared to those who do not conform to these standards. Self-actualization, or the fulfillment of one's potential, is a key conceptual thread between mental health and mental toughness. Thus, theory suggests that mental toughness may represent a positive indicator of mental health or facilitate its attainment rather than be at odds with it. Examine mental toughness among general samples of athletes, students, employees, and military personnel has shown that mental toughness is positively associated with goal progress, objective performance, and positive symptoms of mental health, but is inversely related with negative symptoms of mental health. There are two key features of mental health. One is mental health is not simply the absence of psychopathology of mental illness, but rather encompasses and consideration of two broad yet interrelated dimensions of positive and negative indices that are essential components of optimal function. Two, mental health is state-like and therefore a dynamic construct, such that one should be considered as high in mental health at one point in time but low in mental health at another point. Current perspectives suggest that mental toughness represents a collection of personal resources that are salient for goal-directed behaviors, despite varying degrees of situational demands. Mental toughness is an aspect of psychological individuality that encompasses the aggregation and integration of resources over time through one's experience with stress and adversity. Continuing on from the previous slide, both mental toughness and mental health share conceptual overlap in terms of positive functioning and the centrality of stress and adversity. In this sense, self-actualization or the fulfillment of one's potential is a key conceptual thread between mental health and mental toughness. Stress is ubiquitous in contexts such as elite sports where high performance underpins innovation, success, and competitive advantage. Stressors experienced by athletes emanate from their interactions with multiple aspects of their lives in sporting environments, including personal, competition, and the organization context. Unsurprisingly, there are many reasons why athletes are vulnerable to mental health problems, such as the considerable investments of time and energy, commitment to the identity of an athlete with little exploration of other aspects of self, competitive failure, injury, and recurring separation and reconnection with family and friends from travel. Conceptualized as collection of personal resources that enables athletes to withstand stresses and adversities, mental toughness is potentially expected to promote the fulfillment of one's and therefore contribute to the attainment of mental health. To date, there is no published research that has directly tested whether mental toughness and mental health contradictory, but from a theoretical perspective, many health and mental toughness do not appear to be contradictory concepts. Sleep has been linked to affect elite athletes' mindsets and performance. In recent years, increased attention has been paid to the essential role of sleep in health and well-being. However, like numerous other important health-related behaviors, many athletes still experience inadequate sleep. Compared with non-athletes, athletes tend to sleep less, 6.5 to 6.7 hours per night, and the quality of their sleep is lower. Limited additional research suggests that some athletes, in particular in the NFL, players have higher rates of obstructive apnea, sleep apnea, a sleep disorder that reduces nighttime sleep quality and often results in high levels of daytime sleepiness. We now know the consequences of inadequate sleep are especially important for athletes given the relationship between sleep and athletic performance. Athletes face a unique set of constraints in their efforts to sleep well. Training schedules, available practice times, lengthy travel to competition, jet lag, and pre-competition anxiety can all impact the quality and quantity of sleep prior to performance. Domains of athletic performance, neurocognitive function, and physical health have all been shown to be negatively affected by insufficient sleep or experimentally modeled sleep restriction. Performance psychology plays a vital role in elite athletes' careers. Despite the widespread acknowledgement that mental factors play a crucial role in sporting success, there still exist degrees of resistance among athletes towards sports psychology consulting. As a general rule of thumb, approximately one-third of athletes are not receptive to sports psychology consulting. One-third are indifferent and only one-third are interested. Research has been conducted to determine the main factors that are involved in athletes' attitudes towards sports psychology consulting, which are stigma tolerance, confidence in sports psychology consulting, personal openness, and cultural preference. There is a significant amount of evidence to suggest that male are less receptive to sports psychology consulting than female. It has been found that male athletes are more likely to stigmatize sports psychology consulting, have less confidence in sports psychology consulting, have less personal openness towards sports psychology, and prefer working with a consultant of the same race or ethnicity than female athletes. A common explanation given for this observation is that social norms and cultural stereotypes dictate that male athletes should be tough and masculine and should not exhibit or disclose any emotional problems. The type of sport that athletes engage in has also been found to influence their attitudes towards sports psychology consulting. Athletes who played physical contact sports found sports psychology to be more stigmatizing than non-contact sport athletes. In addition to the previous information, the explanation given for this finding was the athletes who participated in physical contact sports are socialized to accept the pain and hurt that comes with the sport and are not as willing to seek help as non-contact sport athletes. There is also evidence to suggest that an athlete's previous sports psychology experience can affect their subsequent attitudes towards sports psychology consulting. It has also been found that effective past sports psychology consulting experiences were related to positive sports psychology attitudes in the athletes, whereas ineffective past experiences were related to negative sports psychology attitudes. Injuries can have a tremendous adverse effect on athlete psychology. Chronic pain and injury are commonplace in contemporary sports across all levels of participation. Once injured, athletes must contend with a multitude of challenges. In addition to physical rigors associated with overcoming a loss of physical function, injury may induce a plethora of negative cognitions and emotions, apprehensions about the ability to attain or surpass pre-injury levels, and re-injury anxieties. Athletes have also reported feelings of isolation and alienation from coaches and teammates and a lack of social support from significant others. External and internal pressures to make an expedited return to sport and increased likelihood of actual re-injury and the possibility of future health complications may add to the list of aforementioned concerns. Given these issues, it seems reasonable to ask why athletes will remain committed to their sport despite the uncertainties and potential health risks they face in doing so. Sociological evidence suggests that the adoption and internalization of the norms of the sport ethic may play an influential role in athletes' desire to return to sport following injury. Sport ethic emphasizes values such as sacrifice for the game, demonstrating character by playing with pain and injury, seeking distinctions through achievement and challenging limits. While such values may be laudable in nature and unquestioning acceptance or rigid over conformity to the norms of the sport ethic may encourage a mindset of playing with a pain and injury, an intense desire to seek the approval of coaches and teammates, and a need to return sport even when doing so may run contrary to one's health and well-being. Similarity in over-identification with the athletic role may be a key factor energizing athletes returning to sport, even following multiple injuries. 6 sources of sports commitment have been identified when it comes to elite athletes returning to a sport after sustaining a serious injury. Sport enjoyment, valuable opportunities, personal investments, other priorities, social constraints, and social support. Fear of re-injuring themselves causes athletes to go through a tough psychological thought process. A common psychological response to sports injury, fear of re-injury. Other potential psychological responses of an injured athlete include anxiety, depression, frustration, tension, and decreased self-esteem. These psychological responses are generally greatest immediately after sports injury and lessen during the rehabilitation process. If unaddressed and unresolved, these elevated psychological responses to the injury can slow rehabilitation progress and delay return to the sports. Fear of re-injury in athletes is similar to fear of movement, also called kinesiophobia, which is a primary psychosocial construct in the fear avoidance model. Re-injury anxiety is a related psychological construct that is not emphasized in fear avoidance models for chronic pain development. The distinction between re-injury anxiety and fear of re-injury is that anxiety is more of a negative thought or worry of the consequences of injury, while fear of re-injury is specific to fear of the injury itself. As there is no certainty about the extent of re-injury risks and situations, athletes possibly have more re-injury anxiety as opposed to fear of re-injury of these can occur together. Less is known about the impact of re-injury anxiety, while fear of re-injury can adversely result in both psychological and psychological changes that can affect rehabilitation outcomes. Inevitably, athletes can potentially develop depression because of negative outcomes and occurrences happening in their career. Elite athletes have tremendous pressure placed upon them due to immense amount of expectation that themselves, coaches, teammates, team organization, fans, team affiliates, endorsers, and etc. Several findings attest to an antidepressant function of sports. Being active and engaging in sports may possibly result in a lower level of depressive symptoms and may serve to protect against the development of depression. The applicability of these assertions to elite athletes may be questionable. However, because of the extreme load of physical training and psychological stress in high achievement sports, great physical stress and tremendous pressure to perform at the best possible level may also place athletes at risk for developing depressive symptoms. Stress in athletes' life as having an emotional and motivational impact can negatively affect the efficiency of training and the outcome of a tournament or match. Besides the potential negative impact on an athlete's physical achievements, stress can also affect an athlete's self-esteem and social relationships. Coping is considered to be a personal skill or a group of strategies used to handle stress and deal with negative events. Elite athletes who use mainly ineffective emotion-based coping strategy may demonstrate greater depression symptoms. In conclusion, the psychology of elite athletes are complex and hard to understand. There are numerous concerns, questions, and problems in which they must face and endure during their sports career, such as their mental toughness, illnesses, injuries, fear of re-injury, sleep deprivation, and mental health. All these things play a major factor in the psychology of elite athletes. They can ultimately affect their performance in personal lives, on and off the court or field. Issues can manipulate an elite athlete's psychology in a negative manner and can potentially get worse the more the issues go untreated or unaddressed. Once an elite athlete feels they are in a state of vulnerability or weakness, their psychology can become malleable and regress to a state of insecurity, doubt, and anxiety. Now you have a better understanding of the dark psychology of elite athletes and the internal battles and struggles that they face.